"Can you fix me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "My mom doesn't love me because I'm broken." Leland knelt, the worn fabric of his janitor's uniform creasing as he lowered himself to her level. His expression was full of a kindness the little girl had never seen up close. "You're not broken, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice a low, gentle rumble that seemed to push back against the cold silence of the school hallway. "You just see the world differently than we do." The little girl, Cora, looked down at her scuffed shoes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Her small frame was trembling, a tiny boat in the wake of the hurricane that was her mother. Just moments before, the door to the principal's office had flown open with such force it slammed against the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Eleonora Ainsworth, a woman who commanded boardrooms and built empires from flawless code, had stormed out, her face a mask of cold fury. She hadn't even looked at her daughter. Her focus was already elsewhere, her phone pressed to her ear as she barked orders, her sharp heels clicking a rhythm of impatience against the polished floor. Leland had been mopping at the far end of the corridor, his movements slow and methodical, the squeak of his cart a familiar, comforting sound in the after-school quiet. He'd learned long ago how to make himself invisible, to fade into the background. But he had heard the raised voices from behind the principal's heavy oak door. He hadn't tried to listen, but some words were too sharp to be ignored. Learning disability, dyslexia, unacceptable. And then Eleonora's voice, like ice splintering, not an option. Now, the silence she left behind was heavier than the noise had been. Cora just stood there, clutching a piece of paper in her hand, watching the empty space where her mother had been. She looked lost, abandoned. That's when she had turned and seen Leland, and the desperate question had tumbled out of her. Leland's heart ached for her. He had seen kids cry before, over scraped knees and failed tests. But this was a different kind of pain. This was the deep, soul-level hurt of a child who believed she was unlovable. He reached into the pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a small, smooth stone he always carried. It was a simple gray river rock, worn smooth by years of water and time. "See this?" he said, placing it in her small, open palm. "It's not perfect. It's got little dents and lines in it, but that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it one of a kind." Cora closed her fingers around the stone, its coolness a small comfort against her warm skin. She looked from the stone back up to Leland's face, her eyes filled with a fragile, desperate hope. "She's angry," Cora whispered. "She said the letters are easy." Leland nodded slowly. He knew exactly how angry Eleonora Ainsworth could be. He'd felt the chill of her disapproval from a distance. The scene that had just played out in Principal Davies' office was easy for him to imagine. It had started an hour earlier. Eleonora sat opposite the principal and a child psychologist, Dr. Albright, her posture ramrod straight, her designer suit a suit of armor. The office, usually a place of calm authority, felt like a courtroom where her daughter was on trial. "As I was explaining, Mrs. Ainsworth," Dr. Albright said, her voice patient but strained, "dyslexia isn't an issue of intelligence. In fact, many people with dyslexia have above-average intelligence. It's a neurological difference in how the brain processes language. The letters can appear to shift, to transpose." "A defect, then," Eleonora interrupted, her voice cutting through the clinical explanation. "A processing error." Principal Davies shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We don't use that kind of language, Eleonora. It's a condition that requires a different approach to learning. Patience, specialized tools." Eleonora's laugh was short and sharp, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Patience? Tools? I built an empire on flawless code and zero-defect products. My daughter will not be the exception." She leaned forward, her eyes pinning the two educators to their seats. "Stop making excuses for her. The letters on a page are not that complicated. Make her read them." Dr. Albright took a deep breath. "It's not that simple. Forcing her, punishing her for something she can't control, will only create anxiety and shame. It will make the problem worse. Worse? Eleanor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Worse is my daughter, an Ainsworth, being functionally illiterate. Worse is her failing. That will not happen. I pay this school a small fortune in donations to ensure my daughter receives the best education. Not to be told that she is incapable. Find a way. Fix it. The psychologist looked at her, a deep sadness in her eyes. You can't fix a person, Mrs. Ainsworth. You can only help her. The words had been the final spark. Eleanora had stood so abruptly her chair scraped back against the floor. This meeting is over. If you are not capable of solving this problem, I will find someone who is. And with that, she had turned and stormed out of the office, right past her waiting daughter without a glance. Back in the hallway, the memory of that cold fury hung in the air. Leland watched Cora clutch the stone he had given her. Her knuckles were white. The letters aren't easy for everyone, Leland said gently. Sometimes they like to dance around. You just have to learn the music they dance to. A small, watery smile flickered across Cora's lips. Music? Sure, Leland said, his own lips curving into a warm, reassuring smile. Everyone's got their own kind of music inside them. You just have to find yours. From the end of the hall, the front doors of the school opened, and a man in a black suit, Eleanora's driver, stepped inside. His eyes scanned the hallway and landed on Cora. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to go. Cora's smile vanished. The fear flooded back into her eyes. She looked at Leland, then down the long, empty corridor toward the door. She quickly pushed the stone deep into her pocket, as if hiding a precious secret. I have to go, she whispered. I know, Leland said softly. He stood up, his joints creaking a little. You be brave, you hear me? Cora nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She turned and walked away from him, her steps small and hesitant at first, then quicker, until she was almost running toward the waiting driver. She didn't look back. Leland watched until she was gone, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind her. He stood there for a long moment, the scent of his lemon-scented cleaner mixing with the lingering, expensive perfume Eleanora had left in her wake. He felt a deep, unsettling sense of dread. He was just the janitor. It was not his place to get involved. His job was to be invisible, to clean up messes, not to step into them. But as he looked at the polished floor, he saw something Cora had dropped. It was the crumpled piece of paper she had been clutching. He bent down and picked it up. It wasn't a test paper. It was a drawing. On it, in the shaky, uncertain lines of a child, was a picture of a little girl standing on one side of a tall, thick wall. On the other side, a woman with a crown on her head stood with her back turned. It was a simple, heartbreaking drawing that said more than any word ever could. He carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. He knew he should throw it away, forget what he had seen, what he had heard. But he couldn't. The image of Cora's terrified, pleading eyes was burned into his mind. He had told her she wasn't broken, but as he pushed his squeaking cart down the silent, empty hall, he feared that a woman like Eleanora Ainsworth was capable of breaking anything, and he, the invisible man, had just become the only person who had seen the cracks begin to form. The rest of Leland's shift passed in a blur of familiar motions that his body knew by heart. The sweep of the mop, the squeal of the buffer, the click of locks turning in empty classroom doors. But his mind was far away, stuck in the silent hallway with a little girl's trembling voice, echoing in his ears. The folded drawing in his breast pocket felt heavier than a stone, a small square of paper that carried the weight of a child's whole world. When he finally clocked out, the sky was a deep, bruised purple. He drove his old pickup truck, the engine rumbling a familiar, comforting tune, away from the pristine, manicured lawns of the Northwood Preparatory Academy, and toward his side of town, where the streetlights were a little dimmer and the houses sat a little closer together. His apartment was small and tidy, filled with worn but comfortable furniture and the lingering scent of the spaghetti sauce he'd made 2 nights ago. It was quiet. It had been quiet for 3 years now, ever since his wife, Maria, had passed. He walked into the living room and his eyes immediately fell on the picture on the mantelpiece. It was of Maria, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with a life that had been extinguished far too soon. She was standing in front of a classroom whiteboard covered in colorful letters and drawings. Maria had been a special education teacher. She had spent 25 years working with children the system had labeled difficult or slow. "They're not difficult, Lee," she used to tell him, her voice filled with a fiery passion. "They're just trying to read a book written in a language no one else can see. Our job is to help them learn to translate." She had a whole library of books on the subject, many of which still sat on the bookshelf in the corner. He'd absorbed so much from her over the years, not just the clinical terms, but the empathy, the patience, the understanding that every mind worked in its own unique way. He pulled Cora's drawing from his pocket and smoothed it out on the coffee table. The little girl and the queen, separated by a wall. He could almost hear Maria's voice in his head. "Look at the wall, Lee. That's how she feels. Our job is to give her a door." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He wasn't a teacher. He was a janitor who just wanted to pay his bills and be left alone. But the image of Cora's face, so full of pain, wouldn't leave him. Across town, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float among the clouds, there was no warmth. Eleanora Ainsworth's home was a monument to minimalist perfection. White walls, gleaming chrome, glass surfaces that showed no fingerprints. It was less a home and more a gallery, a sterile, silent space where every object was perfectly placed. Cora sat at a large white table in the center of a room that was supposed to be a playroom, but had all the charm of a laboratory. Her mother sat opposite her, a tablet glowing in her hands. "We will try again," Eleanora said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was the same tone she used to address an underperforming division of her company. "The program says these are the most effective methods for rapid improvement. It's a simple matching game, Cora. Look at the letter. Find the one that matches." On the screen, a large letter B appeared. Below it were 4 options: D, P, Q, B. To Cora, they all looked like friends who had gotten into a fight. They were turning away from each other, spinning and flipping. The B on top seemed to melt, its belly sagging, its straight back curving. She hesitantly reached out and tapped the D. A harsh buzzing sound filled the silent room. A red X flashed on the screen. Eleonora's jaw tightened. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The cold disappointment that radiated from her was worse than any shout. "That is incorrect. Try again." Cora's hand trembled. The letters swam before her eyes, taunting her. She could feel her mother's impatience pressing down on her, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the screen even more. "I can't," she whispered. "That is not an acceptable answer," Eleanora stated, her voice like chips of ice. "An Ainsworth does not say, 'I can't.' An Ainsworth finds a solution. The solution here is to focus. Look at the screen and find the correct letter." Cora squeezed her eyes shut. The only thing she could see was Leland's kind face. "You just see the world differently." The thought was a tiny flicker of warmth in the freezing room. She took a shaky breath, opened her eyes, and guessed again, tapping the P. The buzzer shrieked again, louder this time. Eleonora swiped the tablet away. "Enough. We will work until you get it right. We will stay here all night if we have to." She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the glittering city lights below. "Failure is not a word I tolerate. Not in my company, and not in my daughter." Later that night, long after the torturous study session had ended, Cora lay in her perfectly made bed in her perfectly tidy room. But she wasn't sleeping. In the soft glow of her nightlight, she was on the floor, a sketch pad open on her lap. She wasn't drawing monsters or princesses. With careful, deliberate strokes, she drew a single gray stone, worn smooth and resting in the palm of a small hand. She added the little lines and dents Leland had pointed out, giving the simple rock a feeling of character, of importance. It was a thank you. It was a secret. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into a vast and dangerous ocean. The next afternoon at Northwood Prep, Leland went about his duties. The school was buzzing with the energy of another day. He pushed his cart down the pristine hallways, his mind replaying his conversation with Cora. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing he should step back, but feeling an irresistible pull to look over the edge. He was emptying the trash in the second-floor art room when he saw it. Tucked deep inside the bin, underneath some crumpled paper towels but placed carefully on top of a pile of clay scraps, was a folded piece of paper. It was her. It had to be. His heart gave a strange little thump. His hand, calloused and rough from years of work, trembled slightly as he reached in and pulled it out. He unfolded it. It was the drawing of the stone. He recognized it instantly. He knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she had left it there for him. She had found a way to talk to him, a secret language of pictures that only they could understand. A slow smile spread across his face. The little girl had guts. She was a fighter, just in her own quiet way. He looked at the drawing, at the care she had taken with each line. She was reaching out, sending a signal from her cold, sterile world. He carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his pocket, placing it next to the first one. For a moment, he felt a wave of pure, simple warmth. He had made a connection. He had offered a small kindness, and it had been returned. But then, the warmth was replaced by a familiar chill of dread. He looked up and down the empty hallway. This was a dangerous game. Eleanora Ainsworth was a powerful woman, and she had made it clear that she saw her daughter's struggles as a problem to be solved with ruthless efficiency. She would not tolerate interference, especially from a man she paid to be invisible. He was now part of Cora's secret. He was an ally in her silent rebellion. And as he pushed his cart toward the next classroom, he knew he had a choice to make. He could ignore the drawings, throw them away, and go back to being the ghost in the halls. He could protect himself, or he could answer her. He could find a way to send a message back, to let her know she wasn't alone. It was a choice between safety and compassion, between staying invisible and doing what he knew, what Maria would have known, was right. And he had no idea what he was going to do. For 2 days, Leland wrestled with his choice. Every time he pushed his cart past the art room, he felt a pull, a sense of responsibility he didn't want. To respond was to step into a family's private war. To ignore it felt like turning his back on a drowning child. He kept thinking of Maria, of the fire in her eyes when she talked about her students. You can't just stand by, Lee, not when you know how to help. On the 3rd day, he knew he couldn't stay silent. His decision was made. That evening, after his shift, he didn't go straight home. He sat in his truck in the empty school parking lot, a cheap notepad and a pencil resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't an artist, not like Cora, but Maria had always said the intention was what mattered. He thought about Cora's first drawing, the little girl, the queen, and the wall between them. He carefully drew a thick, solid wall, but in the middle of it, he drew a small, arched door with a simple round doorknob. It wasn't a great drawing. The lines were a bit crooked. The perspective was off. But the message was clear. There is a way through. The next day, his heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the art room. It felt ridiculous. A grown man sneaking around like a schoolboy. He checked the hallway. It was empty. With a quick, furtive movement, he lifted the lid of the trash can and placed his folded drawing inside, tucking it under a clean paper towel so it wouldn't get soiled. He closed the lid and walked away, his footsteps echoing louder than usual in the empty hall. The message was sent. Now, all he could do was wait. Eleanora Ainsworth was not a woman who waited. She was a woman who acted. The reports from the new team of tutors she'd hired were not promising. They used words like resistant, anxious, and significant processing delays. To Eleonora, these were just synonyms for failure. She was on a conference call in her penthouse office, pacing back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I am not paying you $400 an hour for delays," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I am paying for results. If your methods are not producing them, then your methods are flawed." "Mrs. Ainsworth," the tutor on the other end of the line said, his voice strained. "Cora's anxiety is the primary barrier. The pressure she feels is making it impossible for her to learn. We need to back off, to create a low-stress environment." "A low-stress environment?" Eleonora scoffed. "The world is not a low-stress environment. She needs to be prepared for it, not coddled. I am coming to the school tomorrow. I will observe the classroom myself. I need to see what is going wrong with my own eyes." The tutor was silent for a moment. "I would strongly advise against that," he said finally. "Your presence will only increase the pressure on her." "Your advice is noted," Eleonora said, and ended the call. She would not be told what to do, especially not when it came to her own daughter. If her team was failing, she would take control of the operation herself. She would go to the school, observe the variables, and correct the error in the system. It was what she did best. The next day, a wave of anxiety washed over Cora the moment she stepped into her classroom. Her teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, had already told the class they would have a special visitor. Cora knew who it would be. The thought of her mother sitting in the back of the room, watching her, judging her, made her stomach twist into a tight, painful knot. All morning, she could barely focus. The words on the pages of her books jiggled and blurred, and the numbers in her math workbook seemed to rearrange themselves when she wasn't looking. Her only hope was art class. It was the last period of the day, a small island of peace in a stormy sea. As soon as she entered the room, she felt a familiar pull toward the trash can by the door. Had he seen her drawing? Had he understood? She waited until Mrs. Gable was busy helping another student mix paints. With her heart pounding, she walked over to the bin, pretending to throw away a scrap of paper. She lifted the lid, and there it was, a folded piece of notepad paper resting right on top. Her fingers trembled as she snatched it, quickly shoving it into the pocket of her jumper before turning back to her table. She waited until she was sure no one was looking. Then she carefully pulled it out under the cover of the table. She unfolded it. A door. A small, simple door in the middle of a big, dark wall. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. He had understood. He had answered. She wasn't just throwing messages into the ocean. Someone was catching them. A tiny, secret smile touched her lips. The first real smile she'd had all day. She looked up, her eyes instinctively scanning the hallway through the classroom's glass panel. And that's when she saw him. Leland was pushing his cart down the far end of the hall. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt his presence like a warm, protective blanket. Just for a second, he glanced toward the art room, and their eyes met through the glass. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and then continued on his way, disappearing around the corner. It was enough. It was a promise. It was proof that she was not alone. For the rest of the art class, Cora drew with a newfound confidence. She drew a picture of a little girl with a key in her hand, walking toward a small door in a large wall. The fragile piece was shattered the next morning. Eleonora Ainsworth arrived at Northwood Prep looking less like a classroom volunteer and more like a general arriving to inspect her troops. She wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a leather portfolio. Her presence sucked the warmth out of the air. Teachers straightened their postures, their smiles becoming a little more strained. Leland saw her from down the hall as he was replacing a flickering fluorescent bulb on a tall ladder. He froze, his hand still on the light fixture. She was here. The danger was no longer a distant threat. It was walking down the hallway, her heels clicking like a countdown clock. He watched as she was greeted by Principal Davies and escorted toward Cora's third-grade classroom. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had started this secret communication, this little rebellion of pictures and kindness. He had put a key in Cora's hand, but he had also painted a target on both of their backs. As Eleonora disappeared into the classroom, leaving a wake of nervous silence behind her, Leland knew their secret world had just become a minefield, and one wrong step could lead to an explosion. The moment Eleonora Ainsworth entered the third-grade classroom, the air changed. A nervous energy rippled through the room. Mrs. Gable's welcoming smile became fixed and tight. The children, who had been chattering happily, fell quiet, their eyes wide and curious as they stared at the impeccably dressed woman who was Cora's mother. Eleonora offered a brisk, professional nod to the teacher, ignoring the children entirely. She didn't take the comfortable chair Mrs. Gable offered near her desk. Instead, she chose a small, hard chair in the very back corner of the room, a position that felt less like a participant and more like a judge. She opened her leather portfolio, clicked a sleek silver pen, and fixed her gaze on her daughter. Cora felt her mother's stare like a physical weight on her shoulders. She tried to make herself smaller in her seat, wishing she could slide under her desk and disappear. She could feel the curious glances of her classmates. They knew her mother was important, a name on the side of the school library. But they had never seen her here, in their space. Her presence marked Cora, singling her out. The morning dragged on, each minute an exercise in quiet terror for Cora. During the reading lesson, Mrs. Gable, trying her best to maintain a sense of normalcy, asked students to read a paragraph from a story about a brave knight. When she called on Cora, a wave of panic washed over the little girl. "Cora?" Mrs. Gable prompted gently. "The next paragraph, please. Starting with, 'The knight approached.'" Cora stared down at the book. The words, which had been sitting so neatly on the page just a moment before, began their chaotic dance. The K in knight seemed to shed its armor. The G grew a tail. The letters swam in a sea of white. She could hear the click of her mother's pen from the back of the room. It was the only sound she could focus on. Click, click, click. Each one a mark against her. She stammered, her finger tracing a shaky line beneath the words, trying to pin them down. "The K-Knight, approached." She stumbled on the word, her cheeks burning with shame. From the back of the room, Eleonora made a sharp, deliberate mark on her notepad. The gesture was small, but everyone saw it. It was an indictment. Cora's voice caught in her throat. The rest of the words vanished. All she could see was that clicking pen, that cold, disappointed stare. "I don't know," she whispered, the words tasting like poison. She hung her head, sinking low in her chair as Mrs. Gable, with a sympathetic glance, quickly called on another student. Leland was polishing the brass handles on the display cases in the hall, his back to the classroom door, but he saw it all reflected in the glass. He saw Cora's struggle, the teacher's pained expression, and Eleonora's icy judgment. He felt a surge of hot, protective anger. The woman was treating her daughter's classroom like a hostile takeover. He wanted to storm in there, to tell her to back off, to give the child room to breathe. But he gripped his polishing cloth until his knuckles were white and forced himself to stay where he was. He was the janitor. He was invisible. The rest of the day was a nightmare for Cora. At recess, she didn't play. She found a spot behind the big oak tree at the edge of the playground and pulled out her sketch pad. Her hands were shaking, but she drew. She drew a little girl in a classroom, with a giant, dark shadow looming over her from the back of the room, a shadow holding a sharp, pointed pen. Getting the message to Leland was a new challenge. With her mother at the school, she couldn't risk being seen near the art room. Eleonora's observation hadn't ended when the school bell rang. She had meetings with the principal, with the tutors. She was a constant, menacing presence in the building. Cora waited until the hallways were nearly empty, until she saw her mother deep in a heated conversation with Principal Davies. With her heart pounding, she slipped away. She ran down the hall to the art room, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. She shoved her drawing deep into the bin, her hands fumbling with fear. As she turned to leave, her breath caught. Her mother was standing at the end of the hallway, watching her. Eleonora's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Cora, what were you doing in there?" "Nothing," Cora squeaked. "Just throwing something away." Eleonora's gaze was sharp, analytical. She looked from Cora's flushed face to the art room door. She didn't say anything else, just gave a curt nod. "Our car's waiting." But the seed of suspicion had been planted. Later that evening, after another torturous tutoring session at home, Eleonora's mind kept returning to that moment. Cora's furtive movements, her panicked expression. It didn't make sense. It was an anomaly, an error in the data. And Eleonora Ainsworth did not tolerate errors. The next day, she returned to the school unannounced. She didn't go to the classroom. She went straight to the art room. It was empty. She walked over to the trash can by the door. It felt absurd, a multi-millionaire CEO digging through a school trash bin. But she was following a lead. At first, she saw nothing. Just crumpled papers and dried paint cloths. But then she saw it. Tucked in the side, a folded piece of paper. It was Cora's drawing from the day before. The girl and the shadow. As she was about to dismiss it, another piece of paper caught her eye. It was older, more crumpled. The drawing of the stone. And then another, the wall with the door. And finally, a drawing that was not in her daughter's hand. A crude, simple drawing of a door. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Someone was communicating with her daughter. Someone was encouraging this weakness. An alliance had been formed behind her back. But who? A teacher? Another student? Her eyes scanned the room, and then it hit her. The trash can. The one place that was off limits to everyone except the person who emptied it. The janitor. The rage that filled her was cold and absolute. The audacity of it. A man paid to scrub floors, daring to interfere with her daughter, with her family. He was undermining her authority, filling her daughter's head with sentimental nonsense about being different. She found Leland in a deserted hallway on the lower level, methodically cleaning the scuff marks from the baseboards. He looked up as her sharp, clicking heels approached, and he knew instantly that the game was over. The look on her face was one of pure, controlled venom. She cornered him, her voice low and dripping with contempt. "You are paid to be invisible. If I see you near my daughter again, you'll be cleaning gutters for a living." At that moment, the door at the end of the hall burst open. Cora came running toward them, her face streaked with tears, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She had just gotten another test back from Mrs. Gable. She ran right between them, shoving a test paper covered in red ink at her mother. "The letters move!" she screamed, the words torn from a place of deep pain. "They won't stay still." "It's not my fault." Overwhelmed, her body shaking with a storm of frustration and grief she could no longer contain, Cora turned and fled, her desperate sobs echoing down the empty corridor. Eleonora stood frozen, the crumpled red-marked paper clutched in her hand. Her threat to Leland hung, unfinished, in the charged air. Her eyes, for a split second, were not filled with anger, but with a flicker of raw, stunned confusion. Leland watched her, his heart a block of ice in his chest. The secret was out. The quiet war of pictures and kindness was over, and the real battle was just about to begin. The echo of Cora's sobs faded, leaving a ringing silence in the hallway. Eleonora stood perfectly still, the crumpled test paper in her hand. For a moment, the mask of the unshakable CEO was gone, replaced by a flicker of raw, bewildered shock. Then, just as quickly, The shock hardened into incandescent fury. She turned her eyes on Leland, and the cold fire in them was enough to make him feel a chill despite the stuffy, heated air of the school. "This," she said, her voice a low, trembling wire of a rage, "is your fault. You filled her head with these sentimental fantasies, that she's different. You encouraged her to fail." Leland met her gaze. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but something else was rising alongside it, a quiet, stubborn anger of his own. "She's not failing, Mrs. Ainsworth," he said, his voice steady. "She's hurting. There's a difference. Do not presume to tell me about my daughter," Eleonora snapped. She crumpled the test paper into a tight ball, a gesture of violent dismissal. "You are done here. Your interference is over." She didn't fire him. That would be messy. Instead, she did what she always did. She made a clean, decisive cut. She turned on her heel and strode down the hallway, her purpose clear and terrible. She wasn't just going to remove Leland from the equation. She was going to change the entire equation itself. An hour later, the news came from a weary Principal Davies. "She's pulling her from Northwood, Leland. Effective immediately." The principal looked defeated. "She's hired a private specialist for intensive, full-time remedial instruction. She's cutting Cora off from everything. Her friends, Mrs. Gable. Everyone." He sighed. "She's building a fortress around that little girl, and I don't think it's to keep the world out. I think it's to keep Cora in." The words hit Leland like a punch. His attempt to give Cora a small door in her wall had resulted in Eleonora bricking up the windows. He felt a profound, sickening wave of guilt. He had failed her. Cora's world shrank to the size of the white, sterile playroom in the penthouse. The new instructor, a woman named Ms. Albright with a severe haircut and a voice that never softened, was a disciple of the Eleonora Ainsworth method. There were no games, no kindness. There were only drills, repetition, and a digital timer that beeped with cold indifference every time Cora made a mistake. Her anxiety grew, a constant buzzing hum beneath her skin. She felt trapped, a prisoner in her own home. She missed the noisy chaos of the school. She missed Mrs. Gable's warm smile, and most of all, she missed Leland. She felt abandoned. The little spark of hope he had given her was sputtering, threatening to go out completely. Weeks bled into a month. Leland went through the motions at work, the school hallways feeling emptier than ever. Every time he passed the art room, he felt a pang of guilt. He had no way to know how Cora was, no way to reach her. He was back to being the ghost, and he hated it. One evening, as he was taking the last of the trash out to the dumpsters, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The back window glided down, and Eleonora's driver leaned out. "You're Leland, the janitor?" the driver asked, his voice low and cautious. Leland tensed, his hand tightening on the handle of the trash bin. "That's me." The driver looked around the empty parking lot, then reached into his jacket. "The little one," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She told me. She said this was very important." He held out a folded piece of drawing paper. "Don't tell anyone you got this from me. I like my job." Leland's heart leapt. He took the paper, his rough fingers brushing against the driver's gloved hand. "Thank you," Leland breathed. The car pulled away, leaving Leland standing alone in the dim light. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper. The drawing was chaotic, the lines frantic and dark. It was a picture of a small bird inside a tiny, cramped cage. On the cage door, where a lock should be, was a detailed drawing of Eleonora's face, her expression cold and severe. The bird's beak was open, but no song was coming out. Outside the cage, in the corner of the paper, was a drawing of a simple gray stone, looking small and far away. It was a cry for help. Leland stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. This was not the end. It was a call to action. His passive attempts at kindness had been brushed aside. The situation called for a different strategy. He was just a janitor. A man with no power, no influence, no wealth. What could he possibly do against a woman who had it all? He didn't have an answer. But as he stood there in the growing darkness, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to find one. The fight wasn't over. Drawing on his late wife Maria's library of special education texts, Leland searched for an authority even Eleonora would have to respect. He wasn't just reading, he was hunting for a weapon. He found it in an old conference program, in a speaker bio Maria had circled in red ink. Dr. Rhys Bowen, the country's foremost authority on childhood learning disorders. Maria's note in the margin read, "He speaks their language." Leland felt a jolt of electricity. This was the man. The next morning, however, his hope crashed against a hard wall of reality. His call to Dr. Bowen's research institute was met with a crisp, efficient receptionist who made it clear that personal matters were not an option. "You'll need a referral from a primary physician and a full diagnostic workup," she stated, her tone bored. When Leland insisted, she was firm. "Dr. Bowen does not take personal calls. You can submit a query through our website." The call ended with a polite click. The website was a dead end, a maze of forms demanding credentials he didn't have. He was a janitor. His query would be deleted without a second thought. The fortress wasn't just around Eleonora. It was around the very people who could help. Defeated, he almost gave up. But then he looked at Cora's drawings laid out on his table. The wall, the door, the bird in the cage. He couldn't let it end here. He had to stop trying to knock on the front door and start looking for a service entrance. His research at the public library gave him a new target. Dr. Bowen was the closing speaker at an education summit at the city's largest luxury hotel in 2 days. Tickets were over $1,000, but Leland wasn't interested in a ticket. He knew buildings like that. On the morning of the conference, he put on his cleanest jeans and a plain blue work shirt, the envelope with Cora's drawings tucked inside his jacket. He bypassed the grand entrance of the gleaming hotel and found the loading dock around the side. Amidst the chaos of beeping trucks and shouting workers, he waited for a moment when the supervisor was distracted, and with his heart pounding, he simply walked in, a ghost slipping through a crack in the wall. He moved with a quiet purpose through the hotel's arteries, finding a staff bulletin board with the day's event schedule. Keynote address, Dr. Rhys Bowen. Grand Ballroom, 4 p.m. His target was the VIP green room next to it. He found a small custodial closet nearby and waited, the envelope a heavy weight on his lap. At 10 minutes to 4, he left the closet and made his way to the corridor outside the grand ballroom. He found a spot near the doors to the green room, pretending to inspect a scuff mark on the wall, becoming invisible again. The speech ended to a thunderous standing ovation. A few minutes later, the doors opened, and Dr. Rhys Bowen emerged, surrounded by a small group of well-dressed organizers. This was his one shot. Leland took a deep breath and stepped directly into the path of the group. "Excuse me?" one of the organizers said, a dismissive frown on his face. "This is a private area." Leland ignored him, his eyes locked on the doctor. He pulled the drawings from their envelope. "Dr. Bowen," he said, his voice coming out stronger than he expected. "My wife was a teacher, Maria March. She said you were the only one in the world who could translate this language." Dr. Bowen stopped. The name didn't register, but the word language did. His eyes fell on the first drawing, the girl and the wall. "Sir, Dr. Bowen is on a very tight schedule," another organizer said, stepping between them. Leland didn't back down. He held up the second drawing. The door. "She said this is a cry for help." Then he held up the last, desperate drawing. The bird in the cage. "And this means she's running out of time." He looked directly at the doctor, his expression a mask of raw, desperate earnestness. "This little girl is being destroyed, and I think I'm the only one who has the dictionary, but I don't know how to use it." The organizers were trying to pull Dr. Bowen away, murmuring apologies. "Sir, we're going to have to call security. But Dr. Bowen didn't move. He raised a hand, silencing his entourage. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the drawings, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, his expert mind piecing together the narrative of pain laid out on the simple, crumpled pages. Dr. Bowen's kind eyes were fixed on the drawings. "The wall," he murmured, his gaze on the first drawing. Classic isolation and perceived parental rejection. He then pointed to the second. The door, an external figure offering hope. His eyes finally rested on the frantic image of the caged bird. And the regression. The hope is now a prison. The parental figure has become the lock. He looked up at Leland, the professional curiosity in his eyes replaced by a deep, human concern. "You said her name was Maria March?" Leland swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "My wife. She passed. She was a teacher. She thought you were the best." Dr. Bowen's expression softened. He gently took the drawings from Leland's hand. "She was right," he said, referring to the drawings. "This is a perfect, heartbreakingly clear narrative of psychological distress." He turned to his stunned assistant. "Catherine, please cancel my dinner engagement. Something more important has come up." He then looked back at Leland. "Walk with me," he said. They found a quiet, empty hotel cafe. "Tell me everything," Dr. Bowen said, his voice calm and inviting. "From the beginning." For the next hour, the story poured out of Leland. He recounted Eleonora's fury in the principal's office, Cora's whispered plea to be fixed, the secret exchange of drawings, and the final, desperate message delivered by the driver. He was unflinchingly honest, painting a clear picture of Eleonora's obsession with perfection and Cora's slow, terrified retreat from the world. Dr. Bowen listened without interruption, his hands folded on the table. When Leland finished, the doctor was silent for a long time, formulating a strategy. "You've done a remarkable thing, Mr. March," he said finally. "You provided this child with an emotional outlet that may well have saved her from a complete breakdown. But the situation is now untenable. Her mother has created a feedback loop of pressure and failure, and it is crushing her." "What can we do?" Leland asked, his voice raw with desperation. "She won't listen to me. She won't listen to anyone." "Precisely, Doctor," Bowen said with a grim nod. "A personality like Eleonora Ainsworth's, a fortress built on the foundation of being perfect. You cannot assault that fortress directly. A frontal attack will only make her strengthen the walls. She can't be told she's wrong. She has to be led to the conclusion herself." He leaned forward, a spark of cunning in his eyes. "Eleonora Ainsworth is a CEO. She speaks a language of efficiency and optimization. So we will speak to her in her language." He explained the plan. His institute had a small, highly specialized corporate consulting division. "I will not approach her as a child psychologist," Dr. Bowen said. "I will approach her as a fellow Titan, a leader in my field, offering a professional consultation to discuss a neurocognitive paradigm for optimizing intellectual assets at her company." He smiled faintly. "It's jargon, but it's her jargon. The goal is simply to get into the room with her, to get inside the fortress under a flag of truce. The topic of Cora will not be mentioned." Leland was stunned by the audacity of it. It was a Trojan horse strategy, using Eleonora's own ambition as the weapon against her. "What is my part?" Leland asked. "Your part is the hardest one of all," Dr. Bowen said, his expression becoming serious. "You must wait. You have carried this burden alone, and you have gotten the message out. Now you must trust me." He slid a business card across the table. It had his private cell phone number on it. "You are no longer alone in this fight, Mr. March." The next day, in her sterile penthouse office, Eleonora Ainsworth received an email from the office of Dr. Reese Bowen. The subject line read, "Consultation Proposal, Unlocking Cognitive Potential at Ainsworth Dynamics." Intrigued by the unprecedented strategic opportunity to increase the efficiency of her coders, the thought of her frustrating daughter was a million miles away. She called her assistant immediately. "Clear my schedule for Friday morning," she commanded. "I'm taking a meeting with Dr. Reese Bowen." That evening, as Leland was finishing his shift, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meeting is set, Friday, 10 a.m. Phase 1 is a go." R.B. Leland stared at the small, glowing screen. A wave of fragile hope, a long shot balanced on a knife's edge, washed over him. The janitor and the doctor, an unlikely alliance, waging a quiet war for the soul of a child. And the first battle was about to begin. Friday morning, in her office on the 50th floor of the Ainsworth Dynamics building, Eleonora was in her element. Her office was a throne room of glass and obsidian, overlooking the entire city. She respected power and intellect, and Dr. Bowen possessed both. He was escorted in, looking less like a scientist and more like a university provost in his tweed jacket. He was calm, his smile gentle, as he carried an old leather briefcase. "Dr. Bowen," Eleonora said, extending a hand after the briefest of pleasantries. "My assistant said your proposal was regarding cognitive optimization, a fascinating field. I'm curious to hear your pitch." Dr. Bowen played his role perfectly. He opened his briefcase and spoke her language. He talked about neuroplasticity in high-stress environments, overcoming cognitive bottlenecks in creative teams, and maximizing the raw intellectual output of human capital. He was painting a picture of a workforce that was not just efficient, but transcendentally brilliant. Eleonora was captivated. "This is all very impressive, Doctor," she said, her voice sharp with intellectual curiosity. "But it is, at the moment, theoretical. I am a woman who believes in data. Show me a case study, proof of concept." This was the moment. The gate was open. "Of course," Dr. Bowen said, his expression unchanged. "The most compelling case studies are often the most personal. The principles of cognitive processing, you see, are universal. They apply to a brilliant software engineer, and they apply to a developing child." He paused, letting the shift hang in the air for a second. "Let's consider a hypothetical case, a mind of truly brilliant potential, a supercomputer, if you will. But it's struggling with a seemingly simple processing error, let's say with symbolic language, with reading." Eleonora's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Dr. Bowen continued, his tone still that of a detached academic. "The conventional approach is to label this a disability, a defect. That's a fundamentally flawed diagnosis. It's not a broken computer. It's a computer running a different, and in some ways, far more powerful, operating system. If you try to run standard linear software on a machine that thinks in three-dimensional images, the software will crash. The solution isn't to punish the machine. It's to write custom code." He reached into his briefcase. "I've been developing a new diagnostic model, one based on assessing cognitive and emotional states through nonverbal creative output. It's astonishing what a mind will tell you when it doesn't have to use words. Let me show you an example from an anonymous case file." He pulled out the drawings, Cora's drawings. He laid the first one on the polished obsidian desk. The girl, the wall, the queen. Eleonora stared at it. Her breath caught in her throat. It was unmistakably Cora's style. "Here," Dr. Bowen said, his voice a calm, clinical narration. "We see the subject's initial state, a clear depiction of a barrier between the self and a perceived authority figure, a state of profound isolation." He replaced it with the second drawing. "The door. Here, we see the introduction of an external variable, a potential solution or ally, a flicker of hope. The system is attempting to find a way through the barrier." Finally, he laid down the third drawing, the bird in the cage. "And here," he said, his voice softening with a hint of sadness, "we see the result of increased external pressure. The hope has been extinguished. The potential escape route has become a prison. The authority figure is now the lock. The system is in crisis. It's crashing." Eleonora stared at the drawing of the caged bird, at the cold, severe face she instantly recognized as her own, drawn in the unsteady hand of her daughter. The sterile air in the office suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. This meeting, this pitch, it was all a lie. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and betrayal. "Where did you get these?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. Dr. Bowen met her gaze without flinching, his expression no longer that of a consultant, but of a doctor delivering a difficult diagnosis. "I received them from a source who was more concerned with a child's well-being than with corporate protocol." The truth slammed into her. She had been played. This man had orchestrated this entire elaborate charade just to get past her defenses. She felt a surge of white-hot humiliation. "This meeting is over," she said, standing abruptly. "Get out." "Eleonora," Dr. Bowen said, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't an attack. It's an intervention. Your daughter is screaming for help in the only language she has left, and you are the only one who can't hear her." At that exact moment, the private line on her desk buzzed, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the tension. Annoyed, she stabbed at the button. "What is it?" It was Ms. Albright, the private tutor. Her voice was thin and reedy with panic. "Mrs. Ainsworth, you need to come home, right now." "I'm in the middle of a meeting," Eleonora snapped. "It's Cora," the tutor's voice cracked. She was in her room, and I stepped out for a moment, and now, "Mrs. Ainsworth, she's gone. I've searched the entire apartment. She's not here. Cora's gone." The world fell away. The fury, the humiliation, the corporate intrigue. It all evaporated, replaced by a sudden, gut-wrenching terror that was cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Her carefully designed, perfectly controlled world wasn't just cracking, it was imploding. And her daughter was lost somewhere in the wreckage. Dr. Bowen stood, his face a mask of quiet, patient concern, watching the Empress as her fortress crumbled to dust around her. For a long second, Eleonora couldn't process the words. "Cora's gone." The phrase was a fatal error in the code of her life. "That's impossible," she said into the phone, her voice flat. "Check again." "I have," the tutor wailed. "The security latch on the service door is unlocked. I think she—" Eleonora slammed the phone down, her mind a maelstrom. The fury she felt toward Dr. Bowen was instantly consumed by a new, far more primal emotion. Ice-cold terror. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "I have to go." Dr. Bowen stood, his expression calm and steady, an anchor in her sudden storm. "Eleonora, think. Don't just react. Where would she go? Not where you think she should go. Where would she go? Where does she feel safe?" The question stopped her cold. Safe? Her mind raced through a list of approved locations, but the words felt hollow. She had no idea where her daughter felt safe, because she had never considered her daughter's feelings as a relevant data point. She stared blankly at Dr. Bowen, the answer a gaping void. I don't know." The admission was a crack in the foundation of her entire identity. Dr. Bowen pulled out his phone. "I think I know someone who does." Leland was wiping down the cafeteria tables when his phone rang. He fumbled for it, surprised to see Dr. Bowen's name. "Leland, it's happened." The doctor's voice was urgent. "Cora's run away. Eleonora is looking in all the wrong places. I asked her where Cora felt safe, and she had no answer. Do you?" The question hit Leland with the force of a physical blow. A place she felt safe. A place where someone understood her language. A place where a kind man had given her a stone and a drawing of a door. There was only one answer. "The school," Leland breathed. "She's coming back to the school." He dropped his rag and ran. He didn't wait for permission. Didn't think about his job. The empty hallways of Northwood Prep became a frantic maze, his heart pounding against his ribs. By the time Eleonora's car screeched to a halt out front, he was heading for the grand entrance hall. He pushed open the heavy double doors and froze. A small group of teachers was already standing just inside, their hands over their mouths in disbelief. Leland followed their gaze, and his heart stopped. The entrance hall was dominated by a massive, floor-to-ceiling glass display case. It was a shrine Eleonora had donated, dedicated to her own flawless academic history. Inside, illuminated by soft spotlights, were her perfect report cards, trophies, and framed degrees. It was a monument to perfection, and Cora had desecrated it. Across the entire surface of the pristine glass, in thick, chaotic strokes of black permanent marker, was a maelstrom of letters, backward, upside down, overlapping, swimming into each other in a frantic, illegible scrawl. It wasn't vandalism. It was a confession. It was a portrait of her mind. And there, at the base of the monument, huddled on the cold marble floor, was Cora. She was curled into a tiny ball, the marker still clutched in her hand, as if the storm inside her had finally broken and left nothing but wreckage behind. At that moment, Eleonora swept into the hall. Her frantic eyes saw the crowd, then the display case. Her terror was instantly consumed by a fresh wave of white-hot, humiliated rage. Her shrine, her name, defaced, publicly. "What have you done?" she hissed, striding toward the display case, her voice trembling with a fury so intense it seemed to suck the air out of the room. She wasn't looking at Cora. She was looking at the chaotic letters, at the destruction of her legacy. Leland moved. He stepped forward, placing himself gently but firmly between Eleonora and the monument. "Get out of my way," she snarled, her eyes still fixed on the glass. "No," Leland said, his voice quiet but unshakable. He waited until she finally, reluctantly, tore her gaze from the glass and looked at him. Then, he gestured, not to the writing on the case, but to the small, broken figure of her daughter huddled on the floor. "Don't look at it as damage, Mrs. Ainsworth," he said, his voice imbued with a strange, sad authority. "Look at it as a translation." Eleonora stared at him, her expression a mask of confusion and anger. "She's showing you," Leland continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is it. This is what it's like to be her. This is what she sees every time you put a book in front of her. It's not rebellion. It's a report. It's the only one she knew how to write." The words, simple and devastating, hung in the air. He guided her gaze from the vandalized glass to the terrified little girl at its base, and then back again. The chaos on the outside and the chaos on the inside. Eleonora's eyes followed his. She looked at the frantic swimming letters, and for the first time, she didn't see an act of defiance. She saw a desperate scream for help. She looked down at her daughter, so small and fragile against the cold marble, and she didn't see a defect. She saw a little girl who had tried to show her mother her world, and in her desperation, had shattered her own. The fury on Eleonora's face slowly, achingly began to crumble. The anger drained away, and underneath it was not the hard bedrock of pride, but something she hadn't felt in years. A deep, hollow, soul-crushing horror. The horror of finally, truly understanding. The wall of glass, covered in the chaotic language of her daughter's pain, seemed to reflect Eleonora's own shattered soul back at her. The fury was gone, washed away by an understanding so profound it left her gasping for air. Her world, built on principles of perfection, had been a lie. Her daughter wasn't a defective product. She was a child crying out for help, and the person she had been crying to was the janitor, because her own mother couldn't hear her. Slowly, hesitantly, Eleonora took a step toward the small, huddled figure on the floor. The crowd of teachers seemed to melt away. The world narrowed to the space between her and her daughter. She didn't know what to say. The words of a CEO were useless here. So, she said nothing. She knelt, the sharp crease of her expensive suit wrinkling on the cold marble, and for the first time, she lowered herself to her daughter's level. "Cora," she whispered, her voice cracking, the name a fragile thing on her tongue. Cora flinched, curling in on herself, expecting the explosion of anger she deserved. But it didn't come. She peeked out from behind the curtain of her hair and saw something in her mother's eyes she had never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. It was fear. And it was tears. Eleonora reached out a trembling hand, not to grab or to pull, but simply laid it on her daughter's back. And then, in the middle of the grand entrance hall of the school that bore her name, in front of everyone, the Empress surrendered. She gathered her small, broken daughter into her arms and held her, not with the grip of ownership, but with the desperate, protective embrace of a mother who had almost lost everything that truly mattered. Later that night, long after Cora was safely asleep at home, tucked into bed with a tenderness she hadn't felt in years, Eleonora returned to the empty school. She found Leland in his small custodial office, preparing to go home. "How?" she asked, her voice low and raw. "How did you know? How did you understand what she was trying to say when all I saw was a mess?" Leland leaned back against his metal locker. The weariness of the day settled deep in his bones. "It wasn't me who knew," he said softly. "It was my wife, Maria." He gestured to a faded photograph on the corkboard of a smiling woman in front of a white board. "She was a special education teacher. She spent her entire life learning to speak their language. She taught me." He told Eleonora about Maria's passion, her belief that every child was a genius in their own way. "She used to say that a child's frustration is just a signpost pointing to a locked door," Leland said, his voice thick with the memory of his wife. "Our job isn't to get angry at the door. It's to help them find the key." Eleonora listened, simply absorbing the quiet wisdom. "What do I do now?" she asked, a desperate plea. "Where do I even begin?" The next few months were a quiet revolution. Guided by Dr. Bowen, Eleonora dismantled the fortress. The severe tutor was dismissed. The high-pressure drills were replaced with learning filled with color, texture, and sound. Eleonora learned to be patient, to celebrate small victories, and to see the world through her daughter's eyes. And slowly, achingly, the wall between them began to come down. One sunny afternoon, Eleonora Ainsworth walked into the custodial office at Northwood Prep and offered Leland a job. "I'm starting a foundation," she said, her voice clear and steady, but without its former icy edge. "I'm seeding it with $50 million. Its mission will be to fund research and support families who are dealing with childhood learning disorders." She looked him straight in the eye. "I want to ensure that no child is ever made to feel broken for simply seeing the world differently, and I want you to run it." Leland was speechless. "Mrs. Ainsworth, I'm a janitor." "No," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "You're the man who saved my daughter. You have a wisdom that can't be taught in any university. Your wife's work, it shouldn't have ended with her. This is a chance to build a legacy in her name." The Maria March Foundation for Different Learners opened 6 months later. At the launch ceremony, Eleonora gave a speech, not as a CEO, but as a mother. She spoke of her own ignorance, her daughter's courage, and the janitor who had taught her the meaning of true strength. Cora sat in the front row, her gaze fixed lovingly on her mother on the stage. She held a special reader with a colored overlay, a tool that now helped the letters on the page stay still. As her mother spoke, Cora beamed, a confident, happy smile that lit up her whole face. Leland stood at the side of the room, introduced as the Foundation's first executive director. He had spent years trying to be invisible, but a little girl's whispered plea had called him out of the shadows. He had lost his quiet life, but in its place, he had found his voice. He had honored his wife, he had helped save a child, and in doing so, he had finally fixed the one thing that was ever truly broken: his own belief that he was just a janitor. What a journey that was. It's amazing how a story can change the feeling in a room, isn't it? My hope is that these stories aren't just an escape, but a spark. a reminder of the courage and resilience that lives inside of you, too. If there's one thought or lesson from this that you'll carry with you, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments below. And I'm always fascinated to see our global family, so feel free to share where you're listening from. If you want to keep finding that spark with us, the subscribe button is right there. We share a new story regularly, each one a testament to the strength of the human spirit. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, sharing this quiet moment with you means everything. So, until our paths cross again, be the main character in your own story, and be a kind one.